journey has taken you from the corporate world to building an organization for children. What was that moment where you realized that children need leadership and it needs to be redefined?
So, what you realize when you interact with people, and like you mentioned, not only have I been in the corporate space, but I've also been in the corporate space for a long time before starting Enabling Leadership. I also had the opportunity to be able to work in various parts of the world and so interact with many different people. So, through that, what you realize is that leadership is not about position. It's not about the fact that you would call someone a CEO, you would call someone a managing director, you would call someone the prime minister. Yes, that is the role that they play. But the real leadership comes from who they are. And leadership is actually much more about strength of character and sense of community. If one has the strength of character and that sense of community, they have the ability to be a role model, they have the ability to lead by example and make the kind of change, whether it's in a company or in a country or in an organization, that doesn't matter, but make changes or help other people make changes. Now, when can you build character? Or when can you evolve character? It's very hard to change impressions and to also change mindsets when you've already grown up with certain impressions in your mind. You've been shaped by the different experiences that you've had in your own life. And so trying to build leadership skills as an adult is a flawed way of thinking about it. If you really want true leadership, which again I go back to saying it's strength of character and sense of community, and if you want to build that in an individual, you have to start when those impressions can be formed. And when you talk to child development and child psychologists, they'll tell you that the impressionable age group, when the best time it is the best time to be able to develop the right mindsets, build the right types of habits, shape your behaviors in certain ways. It is between 10 to 15 years of age when children have the ability to absorb new information, abstract, and start to make those changes and take those impressions and actually have them become imprinted for them. So unless you start building these things at that right age, you will not be able to get to the right character. So for example, if I grew up in an environment where everyone around me was dishonest, I lived in a place where there was a gang of thieves, right? Let's say if that was the case, I would grow up assuming that's the best way to make a living because that's what I've seen and that's what I've grown up around. So that becomes my impression, that becomes my frame of reference. And at that point, I start to form my mindsets and the way I think. Now, if you started talking to me when I'm 25, and if you wanted to change my mindsets, it's a much more difficult challenge to try and work on. But it would take something very extreme to be able to make those mindset changes at that point. But if you're able to catch someone at the right age, at that impressionable age, you'll really be able to make the changes permanent. And then you will get true leadership happening, and you'll get leadership happening with enough leaders. See, one of the problems you have today, and I'll maybe go to, let's talk about India for a minute, and then I'll also talk about a few other places in the world. Many people say, oh, I don't want to vote because I don't like both the options that I have in front of me, or none of the people that are on the ballot are good leaders. Or let's take a look at what's happened in the US recently. The Democratic Party has been struggling to find someone who they believe is their next leader, which actually means that you don't have enough choice of leaders. The same thing is true when you talk to companies, when they talk about succession planning and they say someone left the organization, or one of our managers or one of our leaders left the organization or retired. We don't have enough people who we think are good candidates to take that person's position, right? It's really a sign that you don't have enough choices, which again means that you haven't built that leadership capacity. So it's very important to start young.
So if I ask 10 people about leadership, I'll get 10 different answers. What do you think is the definition of leadership and how has it changed over the years?
Like you rightly pointed out, you will get many, many different answers for leadership. Probably the one that you'll get the most often is someone who's got the ability to lead a company, lead a country, lead an organization. What you'll also probably hear is about what does it take to be that kind of a leader, which is where I think there are a lot of different definitions. Some people will point to personality, some people will point to character, some others might talk about the fact that someone has the knowledge and the experience to be able to lead. I think there is a very important reason for us to redefine leadership, which is that in a complex world like today, where it's very global, there are so many different things that are happening all at the same time, and there are so many different variables. It's impossible to expect that you'll get one person to be that leader. Or, more importantly, I would say it's impossible to expect one person to solve all the challenges. So, there has to be a democratization of leadership where people can take the initiative and there is a bottom up approach to solving problems. And when every single person says that I will take responsibility for myself and those around me, and therefore, in my own right, I'm a leader, then you'll really start to see change. And so, this idea that leadership is more a movement or it's more about a collective action is likely where we should take things going forward.
So, for decades, we have measured success by marks, degrees, and what college the kids go into. Do you think these measures are still enough today? Why or why not?
It's a great question. And in fact, I would actually answer it in a very different way, Aliya. It's first of all not that it's a measure that's even adequate, it's actually the wrong measure. And the reason is that the idea that I'm going to measure how much knowledge you have based on a test I give you is not actually telling you anything anymore. I probably can go to Google or even now with AI, look up whatever information I want. And so I don't need that knowledge. And in fact, I'll give you a very personal example. When my son was in grade 8, they were learning the periodic table. And he came to me and he said, I've been able to understand how the periodic table came to be. I understand the logic in how you place the different elements on the periodic table, but I really don't understand why I need to learn every single element and where it is on the periodic table because I can just look it up. So, the idea that we are trying to measure based on how much knowledge you have and based on how much knowledge you can retain is actually completely the wrong way to think about how to measure success in education. What we really need to think about when we say, I'm educating you, I'm actually preparing you for life in the future. I'm giving you the skills, the mindsets, the behaviors, the habits that you need in order to succeed in whatever way you want to measure success. You might be an academic and you want to become a professor. You might want to join a company. You might want to start your own company. You might want to become a social worker. It doesn't matter how you define success, but if you want to be the kind of individual who is making a change in society, is bringing about a bigger difference other than earning a living to themselves in whatever shape and form you want to do that, then to be equipped, you have to be able to learn how to think. You have to be able to learn how to problem solve. You are going to come across many problems. You have to learn how to overcome those challenges. You have to learn how to work with people. You have to be a good communicator so that you can influence others and convince them about the change that you're trying to make. So these are likely the more important indicators of success. And if you want to measure, you'll have to find ways to measure whether I'm a good collaborator, whether I'm a good team player, whether I'm a good communicator, whether I'm a good problem solver. And those are likely the more important measures. And also, very likely in the future, not just important measures, but probably only measures that matter.
We hear hear a lot about AI, automation, and the future of work. What do you believe are some valuable skills that are going to be super important in the next decade?
So I think that many people are viewing this in the wrong way, or maybe don't have a good understanding of what all of this means. So I think that people are not taking the advent of AI, or for that matter, any technology that has been there in the right way. And here's why I'm saying that. If you look at human civilization, we have always tried to find ways to make life easier. We've always tried to find ways to make things better for us as human beings. And ever since industrialization happened, it's been a huge number of technologies that we have been able to use. So let's take a very simple example. Everyone uses Uber and other ride hailing apps. I don't think people remember anymore what it was like before these apps came along. Some people used to think that this is going to completely destroy the taxi service and all the taxi drivers are going to be out of jobs. But it's actually created more jobs. And it's made life easier because every single technology has always changed things. And while change is not easy, if you look back, it has made things easier, it has made things better. Invariably, it has also resulted in a loss of jobs in some places, but it potentially has created more jobs in other places. So this has been going on for a very long time, and we tend to keep looking at things and worrying about it in the wrong way. However, what is actually important is to be able to use the technology in the right way. So let's take AI as an example. You have an AI engine, or call it a tool, right? And you can ask it any question you want, and it's going to be able to give you an answer. Now, there are two very important things. One is, do you know what kind of questions to ask it? And that is coming from, do you know what problem you're trying to solve initially? And do you know which problem you want to solve? And therefore, now you can say, I know what question to ask. Secondly, when you get an answer, you have to evaluate that. It's not like you can say 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, and therefore I know it's true. If you asked AI saying, how do I solve this problem, or where can I look for something, and it's going to give you an answer, how do you know that it's the right answer for you? How do you know it is indeed going to solve your problem? So those thinking skills are in many ways going to be even more important and more crucial for someone to develop. Right? Now, the other thing that unfortunately has happened, and I would again attribute it to the wrong use of technology. Let's take the smartphone as an example. It's an amazing tool. You can use it as a phone, you can use it as an internet device, you can use it as a camera, you could use it as a clock, you could use it as an alarm clock. There's so many, probably thousands of different uses for it, right? But what has happened is that we've ended up creating some tools, especially which are social media tools, which originally were meant to allow for people to interact globally. But they've ended up making you less interactive in many ways and made you a poorer communicator or a poorer collaborator, right? But that's not the problem of the tool, it's how you use it and how you actually decide whether you're going to use it for something good or whether you're going to succumb to what the technology does, right? So making good use of technology is going to be an important skill that you can have or that you need to have, and then it'll allow you to decide whether you can improve things or whether you become a victim of the technology. So I always go back to the same set of what we all call life skills. Some people call them soft skills, some people call them 21st century skills. But in a way, they're actually leadership skills, right? They are about making the right choices, knowing that it's important to collaborate, knowing that you have to be able to make sure that everyone benefits, and knowing that you can think about the right choices. And then technology becomes a force for good, and not a threat or a problem.
Schools have been incredibly good at teaching knowledge and memorization stuff. But are we equally good at learning skills or teaching skills about resilience, collaboration, empathy, and problem solving?
So there's an increasing trend, especially amongst the high-end private schools. For example, nowadays there is this term that people use called international schools. There's a host of different methodologies in education now, and the emphasis is on what they call holistic development. So it's about learning numeracy, literacy, learning about science, learning about math, but equally learning about communication and collaboration, learning about problem solving, being exposed to things like sports and arts, and being able to go outside of the school and interact with people in the community. Now, that is essential, and in a way, the school is the best place for that to happen. It has to happen, of course, at home with your parents. It doesn't always happen, but it should happen. It can also happen in the community where you live amongst your neighbors and others. But the school is a fantastic place for that to happen because you have a natural environment where all the students, all the children are together in the same place. And so it's an amazing social setting to be able to have all of these different things happen. Now, the problem is that it seems to have become only a privilege of the rich few to be able to go to these kinds of schools. So now what you're doing is you're saying that because I come from a well-to-do family, my parents have the ability to send me to this kind of school. I probably live in a community of like-minded people who also have the same kind of investment in their children. I might even have the ability to go and take part in all sorts of extracurricular activities, join a football club or learn music through a teacher. I might also have the opportunity to travel to different places and meet people. And so now, because of the family that I was born into, I'm being given all of these different opportunities. But what that does is it actually leaves a very large number of children ill-equipped because they just don't have the opportunity to learn these skills, right? So what's more important for us to think about is how do we make sure that every child can go to a school that is providing this opportunity? That should be our goal. At the end of the day, I would like to have us think about not this idea of universal right to education, but we should redefine it and say universal right to life skills education. And if that can happen where every child has that opportunity, then I think you will end up without a problem in society. But as long as you say that these skills, which are so important, are only available to a select few, then you'll always continue to have a problem.
Many organizations focus on education through academics, but enabling leadership has taken a very different route. So, sport, Lego, and music. And I just wanted to understand why these creative mediums.
Let me answer that in a slightly different way for you. Right? There are so many different problems in the world. In the field of education, there is a gap in the availability of teachers and schools providing what I call foundational numeracy and foundational literacy, which then adds up because you have to know your ABC and 1, 2, 3, and then eventually you learn science and you learn various subjects. But because you've built that ABC and 1, 2, 3, then you can learn other things. So that access isn't there for quite a few children, and so there are organizations that focus on that. Now, what I found was that despite there being enough evidence about the importance and criticality of life skills, as in the need for children to be able to build these life skills being probably the most important factor towards their success. There's enough and more proof of that. There's a huge amounts of evidence for that. There just wasn't enough energy being spent on it. There wasn't enough time being spent on it. And most organizations were not focused on that. So we said, look, this is an important problem. And there seems to be a lot of effort going into other areas. But there's not enough effort going into this area. And because it is a critical area, let's focus on that. And let's, first of all, make a difference in the children's lives. But if we're able to make a difference in enough children's lives, hopefully it'll also come to the forefront as to why this is a big problem and why it needs to be solved. Now, there is probably a very large amount of research available that talks about how do you teach these life skills, because I cannot stand in front of a blackboard and say, today let me teach you how you can become a better communicator, and here are the 5 ways to do that, or I will help you become more self-confident, and let's read it in a textbook about how to become self-confident. So it's well known that things like team sports and arts and what people call free play, which is unstructured play, are some of the best mediums to be able to develop these skills. But what's important is to provide children with a structured environment where they can. So, for example, you might say, I might learn some soft skills or life skills by just going and playing on the street with other children. And it's true, you can. But if I can be in a structured environment with the right coach or with the right teacher and be engaged in team sports, then my ability to learn those life skills are going to be much, much better. Um, I might be able to bang on a piano and learn something, and through that, I could learn a lot of interesting things. But if I could be in a classroom working with 10 other children or 15 other children and a teacher who's an amazing facilitator, and then we're using music, it's just going to be the right environment for me to learn those things. So we have not invented these things, but we've taken what is out there in terms of fantastic research and evidence about what it takes to teach these life skills. But we've created programs out of that. We've made them structured, we've made them scalable. We've also chosen mediums that will allow us to scale. So for example, why football? You could use volleyball, you could use basketball, you could use any team sport. But we said, football, you could probably play it on a very small playground, you could play it on a turf. All you need is a ball. Whereas if I had to play basketball, I need a basket, I need some kind of a court, I probably need more facilities, right? Same thing with music. Could you learn an instrument? Absolutely. There are plenty of programs that use instruments. But we said if it's vocal and it's more like a choir where we're all learning how to sing together, then it's more scalable. You can do it in many different languages. It appeals to many cultures. So we've just chosen the mediums based on what will allow us to make it effective at scale. So I'll take a step back. There's a term called intergenerational poverty, which means that if I'm born into a poor family, there's a very high chance that my family will also be poor. And so my kids will also be born into a poor family. So if the only way I can get out of that is by investing and having the opportunity to learn those life skills, to be able to get out of that situation, then I need that opportunity. Now, if that opportunity costs money, then, and I don't have the money, then I end up in the same boat again and again and again. Right? So this skill gap widening comes from the fact that every generation, if I cannot get out of that problem, and that problem actually requires money which I don't have, then I am never able to get out of that. An example of this is that if, let's say, you are sinking and you're in the water and you're not able to get your head out of water, and so you cannot breathe, the chance that you'll drown is very high. But if I could just lift you a little bit up and allow you to breathe, you may be able to learn how to swim. But if you're not able to breathe, then you'll never learn how to swim because you cannot survive. Right? So how can I provide that impetus for you to learn those skills to then be able to get out of the water eventually? Right? Then I'm narrowing the skill gap. But if I'm never giving you the opportunity to just put your head above water and breathe, then that skill gap will never get covered.
World Youth Skill Day is on 15 July, and it reminds us that preparing young people for employment is not about technical knowledge anymore. What do you believe is being future ready really means?
So let's take a very broad view to World Youth Skill Day. When you think about building skills for youth, it's fundamentally about being prepared for the future. Now, what does that mean? It's not just about finding a job. It's about being able to live a fruitful life. It's about being able to afford the things you need to be able to take care of yourself. But I would even say it's more important than that. It's about, am I able to do the things that I enjoy doing? Am I getting the satisfaction from life? Am I able to build a community around me? Do I have good friends? Am I able to support my family? Am I able to engage in activities that are going to improve things around me? So it's a fulfilling life, right? So when you think about what are the skills you need, I would actually say it's about how do you succeed in having a life that is worth living, right? And that's along with the employment, because that will then give you the ability to have the means to live that kind of a life, right? So, with that very broad definition, if you now said, what kind of skills do I need for the future? It's more important to think about how do I equip myself with things that will allow me to adapt, allow me to collaborate, and allow me to think. So, what is very true about the future? Um, so, the point here is that technology is moving very fast, things are changing very fast. So, change is inevitable and that change is accelerating, right? So, how do you learn to be someone who's very adaptable, who can take and absorb the changes, but also flourish in those changes, right? You have to be a risk taker. You have to learn how to fail and say, I tried something new, which I never did before, and it didn't work, but I learned from that and I'm able to keep moving, right? I think that's a very, very important skill. The other one is the understanding that it's important to be able to learn about living in society, right? So, what's the difference between an animal in the jungle versus human beings? It's really about how we have formed societies, and those societies today are increasingly global. It's not just a pack of wolves or a small group of elephants that are in a herd that are helping each other, right? We're talking about cities which are millions of people or interacting with people across the world. So, our ability to collaborate across a global perspective is what differentiates us as human beings. But if we are not able to collaborate, if we're not able to interact, if we're not able to think of ourselves as social beings, then our ability to flourish is going to be diminished. The idea that I can just live by myself in a jungle doesn't work, right? So it's the ability to flourish in that way becomes very important. So this idea of World Skill Day should be focused on the skills that allow me to adapt, the skills that allow me to socialize and collaborate. And the last piece is the recognition that I am likely going to face situations in the future that are well beyond just my immediate circumstances. The problem that's kind of facing us like a brick wall is climate change, right? Every single day we see it. Now, the reason I bring that up is because it's about the environment, it's about the world around us, and not just my neighbors, right? It's about people living across the ocean, fires and floods, and all sorts of other calamities that happen. Now, what does that mean? It means that we could even risk the fundamental existence of big groups of people. You know, large cities might go underwater, right? But the reason I'm raising this is not because, oh wow, it's a big problem and we have to be prepared for it. The reason I'm raising it is that it's actually everybody's problem, and therefore it's nobody's problem in a way. So, how do we tackle that? We can only tackle it if we can, each of us say it's my problem, and all of us together say it's our problem. How do we learn to think in that way, which allows us to say that these problems relating it to, you know, what's called the commons, the water, the air, and those kinds of things, that we can only solve it if it is a combined problem, it's a shared problem, and it's a commitment to saying it's a shared future. So, thinking about skills from that angle are likely going to equip youth in the right way, which will then allow them to not just say, I can survive, but say, I can flourish and thrive.
You have shared a very compelling vision of why leadership needs a reset. For those of who are listening, what are some role that we can play so that every child can have an opportunity to become a leader?
So, there are really two very simple things, right? If we first of all believe that every single person can be a leader in their own right. And I go back to that fundamental definition saying, who is a leader? A leader is someone who is worth following. And someone is worth following because they're inspirational, they're a role model, and they're a role model not to the entire nation or to a large number of people. They're role models to people around them, their neighbors or their family members or their classmates. So, with that definition in mind, the first step is, are you a role model? Because you can be a leader in your own right. And so, be an example for other people. And answer to yourself that question, am I the kind of person who other people would like to follow? Am I the kind of person who can be inspirational to other people? The second thing is, how can I be that example for children? And for example, with teachers, you cannot have a teacher who doesn't actually serve as a role model. If I'm not doing the things that I'm asking the children to do, there's no way the children are going to listen to me. So if I can commit to investing in children, and it could be through funding a program, but more importantly, being that example in front of children investing the time, then you are allowing the children to look up to you. And with those role models, children will emulate. They'll always copy, they'll duplicate, they'll do the same things that you do. And then you're allowing them to be the kinds of leaders